now as a multi-billion-dollar company, I find myself the pendulum swinging back from things that you do at a small company to things that you do at an enterprise. So it's kind of come full circle now as we look to more enterprise level capabilities, process, audits. It's been kind of an interesting journey.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative and Wiz is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership with one of the contributors to my latest book, the best-selling CISO COMPASS Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, as well as from other top CISOs and security thought leaders. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC or visit cyberleadersunite.com. I am your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Dane Sandersen, Global CIO and CISO at Trek Bicycle.
I really have always just had a kind of a internal desire to protect. I don't know what it was. From college, I studied criminal justice and more of the physical security side. The military, I was a military police, and then cyber in the military. But all along the way, I liked to be a technologist, but also I like to protect. So I had those two kinds of worlds, I suppose. Going both the physical and kind of military side. And then on the civilian side, I always did work with technology. And over time, they kind of just converged. And maybe a little over 10 years ago, I started in my first cybersecurity or information security position. It's, like I said, I've always been drawn to that. And through whether it's physical protection or digital protection, that had always just really appealed to me. And when I saw the opportunity, when cybersecurity really was starting to emerge, I jumped at that opportunity.
Did you see a lot of commonalities between the physical security, the military security, and IT security?
I did, yes. There are a lot of parallels. When you think about perimeter protection and the different layers that you can have there, whether it's fencing or lighting or cameras or dogs, there are equivalents on the cybersecurity side as well. When you talk about defense in depth, with badging and access control, there are really a lot of parallels. So it really wasn't too heavy of a lift, and it brought kind of together the joy of protection and technology, and there are a lot of parallels.
Well, it's great to have you here today, and I love the title of the piece that you wrote for CISO COMPASS, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges from Pioneers, and you wrote a piece called "Moving from a Large Company to Small to Medium-Sized Company as a CISO," and I think it's an interesting dimension to go from a large company into a smaller company, part of a larger team, and now you're running the security for a smaller company. So what made you want to make that move?
Well, I think that at the larger company, I was kind of a cog in the machine, but I really wasn't leading and setting that direction. That's really what I was interested in doing, taking more of a leadership role. And the opportunities weren't there. And as fate would have it, I was approached and was offered kind of that seat at a company that really had little to no cybersecurity going on. So I saw it as a greenfield, as a big opportunity to build a program, and that was really appealing to me.
Well, it sounds like a great opportunity to be able to take the CISO seat and then shape that program. And you said in your piece that compared to larger enterprises, that there's a few differences that you notice. So what are some of those differences that you've found in moving to a smaller organization?
Sure. Lack of progress, or not process, lack of process, I should say. Lack of process and documentation, and really education about cybersecurity. The C-suite knew that this was becoming a large risk for companies and they needed to make an investment, but they really didn't know much beyond that. And that's why they were looking for that leader. While Trek is a global company that dabbles in all sorts of different industries, they just had not made that investment. They did not really look at things from a risk standpoint. They kind of moved fast instead of, I guess, moving right initially. And what I can say is having a risk element join the IT department in the company and working with some of those other departments, whether it's legal or audit, we were really able to make some progress. So I think it's a combination, to answer your question, combination of education and process and risk management.
Yeah, so when we're not having a technology-based company, Trek makes bicycles, very good bicycles, by the way, and so it's not their core business being an IT firm, but they use a lot of IT in their firm, and so what sort of changes did you make when you got there as a CISO?
Sure. I worked with some third parties. Again, I was kind of an army of one at that point. And we did some assessments and kind of prioritized all the items that we ought to go after. I spoke with all of the vice presidents of the company, trying to understand their business, where they saw risks, how they prioritized or how they valued some of these IT assets that might be vulnerable. And then we kind of marched down the line. One of the things that we started with is the disaster recovery. It's not always seen as strictly a security responsibility, but again, nobody was doing it here, so that was one of the things that we started. And we kind of had everything hosted internally in our own building. Now, we made an evolution to dual colos to the cloud. So we made a lot of progress there. We worked on our hardening our perimeter. There was a lot of opportunities there. Folks weren't necessarily, again, paying attention to all the holes. Nobody was checking. We didn't have a regular pen test schedule. Plugged a lot of those holes. We looked at all of our data, got an inventory of our sensitive data, understood where a cyber threat could impact the company, and again put those controls in place. I can't say I guess which initiative was the most important, but there were so many. Again, I'm starting at a company that really had not placed any focus aside from a few infrastructure people doing their best, and so the tasks were huge. And we had to just, take them on one by one as we can based on that priority and that threat to the business.
So were there any frameworks that you found to be useful that weren't being used at the company that you brought in? Initially we looked at NIST. That was one of the recommendations. I thought it was probably a little too unwieldy given where we were. And then we moved for the CIS critical controls.
Yes, and they've kind of moved around and the name has changed a little bit, but we found that was kind of at the level that we were ready to attack. So we had those mapped back to NIST, and I think everybody knows that how to do that. But we started marching down the line, and that was kind of, I guess, the next level of maturity when we started using that framework and measuring kind of where we're going. But like I said previously, not only had those controls were considered, you didn't know what they didn't know, but once we put that in place, that did help guide our path.
I think that's a really good approach. In fact, that's looking at the technical infrastructure and using those CIS controls. That's one of the strategy approaches that we talk about in the CISO COMPASS book. So it's nice to hear a real example of how you've done that sort of bottom up to start, and then eventually you end up in that top down looking. That top-down look at the organization. So you also indicated that the board of directors had a different level of understanding than, say, in the large company. Could you explain that? And then how do you get the board to be more cybersecurity savvy?
Sure. Yeah, it's back at the last company, they had a steering committee that was headed by the CEO and chairman of the board, and with his VPs and sometimes board members. So it was a lot different. That CEO was very interested in security, and so that focus was there. And when people talked about security, they knew that it not only was it coming from the CISO, but it was coming from the CEO as well. So it had a very strong culture of security, which is super important, right? Over here, we had a couple of board members that were smart enough to spell IT, but it didn't go beyond that. They had some experience with other boards with companies that had different problems that they had to adapt to from a cyber perspective. So it started with kind of educating the senior leadership of the company and forming that steering committee. Had the head of HR and the CFO and the head of legal and a number of other business representatives. And we had a monthly cadence where we talked about security issues and progress. And I think it was within the first 90 days, we were presenting to the board. And I sent some primers, cybersecurity primers, and had some off board meeting discussions with them to kind of update them on their vernacular and what was going on in the world. And so it was a multifaceted effort. But it all started with I find that if you can build confidence with the layer below, the layer you're trying to influence, then when they look to those trusted people, they're all going to be singing the same tune. And that had been really helpful. So working with those executives at the VP plus level, and as the board members would look down and query them, they were singing the same story that I was telling.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CISO COMPASS, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers. And how did you convince them that these were the right activities to take without going into the whole FUD vernacular?
Right. It's not about fear, uncertainty, or doubt. It is really about just describing the risk to the company. These are where our highest impact and potentially highest frequency things would occur. These are what we estimate would be the impacts from a cost and reputation perspective. Working with other teams, having audit weigh in, having finance weigh in, kind of circling the wagons, I suppose, in that regard. So it's more fact based and making sure that other perspectives are being heard, not just saying the sky is falling. But here's a thing that is out there. That thing is a potential risk and could have an impact to us, and this is what it's going to be. And then we, based off of those impacts, what we might have to react to, prioritize and try to remediate the most dangerous ones first.
So you also talked about bringing in people that are advocates for your main products in your organization and the financial departments to become security advocates.
Absolutely. And I can't remember who coined the phrase or where this came from, but it held true in my previous company, is that the triumvirate of legal, audit, and information security were a hard force to stop. Audit has the access to the board, generally speaking. There's usually an audit committee in those boards, and they have that voice. The legal department has kind of this is the law, and this is what we should do. These are the risks, as the legal is kind of the original risk manager of the company. And then the IT security piece comes in, and it's this new threat that's I suppose it's always been around to some degree, but its prominence has really grown in the last 10 to 15 years. And so they amplify your message. They legitimize your message. The audit team, gets it on the agenda. The legal team backs it up, and you're there, working in concert with them and other stakeholders as well. Finance is another one, because you're going to need help to fund your defenses.
I think that's really good advice. And with the budgets being small at small companies, and you started off as an army of one, and indicating that you had to roll up your sleeves, how much hands-on stuff were you expected to do? Were you configuring firewalls or vulnerability scanners, or what did that job look like when you arrived?
Sure. It was, because I was an army of one, there was only so much I could do. But there was some light administration and investigation of tools. I ran the first DR project. And, but for a lot of it, because we were starting so fresh, that I leveraged the infrastructure team for a lot of those kind of stop the bleeding efforts. They had the access to that infrastructure. I worked with them to bring in platforms, to bring in controls, and I think it all starts with infrastructure. Now, clearly, there are many different directions to go, but I think infrastructure again is one of those foundational places that you have to start getting secure. Now, so you can work in other places, but if your infrastructure has problems, then you're going to continue to have problems. So I built that partnership with that infrastructure director. In the past, I saw a lot of tension between security and infrastructure because traditionally, infrastructure had usually run any kind of security, whether it was identity or firewalls and those kind of things. So I think there had been some territorial things going on there, but also rivalry for budgets. And I said, we can't have this here. So leave that kind of baggage behind at the last company. And starting fresh, I'm interviewing with my peer, the infrastructure director, who said, hey, we have to work together. This has a lot of force. I was hired for this reason. Force behind the board is behind us. So we know these things are going to happen, but I don't want to crush your team either. So let's work this out. Let's figure it out. And we had a really great partnership. And in the end, we kind of had designated a additional information security headcount from infrastructure working on all these issues, who then ultimately became a member of my team. So not only did we work in great partnership, but eventually that helped build the team as well. So it was go ahead.
So you have kind of grown the CISO role, right? In that now you're actually leading IT or part of IT.
That's correct. I kept on getting additional responsibilities. That infrastructure director left the company 2 years after I started, and I assumed that infrastructure role, and then the rest. So we went from really that army of one to over 150 people in traditional IT. And I'll say, though, people knew where I came from, and it, I think, helped instill a culture of security. I was the one that was pushing all these security efforts. I took over the infrastructure team who had already had that focus for a large part, and continued pressing. So it became more of an expectation that when you're doing something that you get evaluated, and that you make sure that it's patched, and that you make sure that it's on the pen test list, and all those kinds of things.
Well,
and
I'm
I'll
sure
also say,
I was just going to say, I'm sure they appreciated the experience that you were bringing in and being able to see that bigger picture from a large company into a smaller company.
They did. They didn't always appreciate the work that came along with it because we had to shift, other business initiatives. But we did the right thing. It's always that balance. And I don't know if this is more of a philosophical argument, but where does this CISO report, whether it's a CIO, and there's a conflict, because they're always going to kind of weigh or put their finger on the scale in terms of capabilities versus mitigating risk. But having now wearing both of those hats, I do really try to do that, meeting those business needs, delivering the capabilities, but also making sure that it's secure. And neither one will always hold sway. It's that balance. There has to be some analysis, because if there's a huge opportunity, and you have to look at that risk, and maybe that sometimes that capability is the thing that does get done first, and we don't focus as much. But for the most part, there is security baked in everything that we do. But again, it's that analysis that we need to take into account. What I was going to say is also it's interesting. We talked about, the piece in the book was about moving from a large company to a small company. Trek has grown almost 3 times its size in terms of revenue since I've joined. And so now, as a multi-billion-dollar company, I find myself, the pendulum swinging back from things that you do at a small company to things that you do at an enterprise. So it's kind of come full circle now as we look to more enterprise level capabilities, process, audits. It's been kind of an interesting journey.
Well, it sounds like they have the right person for the job then. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we close with our listeners, whether they be current CISOs, emerging CISOs, or new CISOs that you'd like to share?
Just stay on top of it. Keep your finger on the pulse. It's easy to, you have competent teams and letting them run, but without keeping your eyes open, without paying attention to the geopolitical and technology advances in the world, you're going to sell yourself short. You're not going to be able to anticipate the next big threat coming your way. There's a look beyond your company, whether it's a public-private partnership. There are all sorts of organizations, the government that you can partner with, or private industry, or even just private organizations. So keeping your learning engine moving and keeping your finger on the pulse of security wherever it happens to be.
Well, Dane, I think that's great advice. And thanks a lot for taking the time on your busy schedule to talk with us today.
Thanks, Todd. It's been a pleasure.
Wiz is on a mission to help every organization rapidly identify and remove critical risks in their cloud environments. Purpose-built for the cloud, Wiz delivers full-stack visibility, accurate risk prioritization, and enhanced business agility. Wiz connects in minutes using an agentless approach that scans both platform configurations and inside every workload. We perform a deep assessment that goes beyond what standalone CSPM and CWPP tools offer to find the toxic combination of flaws that represent real risk. To learn more about Wiz, please visit securityweekly.com/Wiz.